Okay, good morning. In the last class, we have looked at this quadratic integrated fire neuron. It's a spike neuron model. And we have shown that it's a very simple model. There is just one equation with a quadratic nonlinearity and a few parameters like this, V peak and V reset. Uh, also, the V threshold and V resting are implicitly present inside the equations itself, dynamic equation itself. So the only two parameters are V peak and V rest. So we have seen that even the simple model can show three different kinds of dynamics. Right? First one has simple excitability, the second one has bistability, right? And the third one has continuous firing. Right? There's no other state. There's only just continuous firing. And there are such neurons in the real brain that fire continuously. So so basically we are, as you see, starting from Archie model, we are gradually stepping down the complexity ladder, so to speak, right, and presenting simpler and simpler neuron models. So the simplest possible neuron model, or simplest possible spiking neuron model, that is a neuron model which can produce some kind of spike, right, is the leaky integrated fire neuron model. So this is basically a linear version of the quadratic integrated fire neuron model. In quadratic integrated fire, there is a quadratic nonlinearity. Instead of that, if you have a linear term, right, you get a leaky integrated fire neuron model. The leaky refers to like a decay term, a linear decay term. So this neuron is described often presented as a circuit model, but you can get rid of the circuit interpretation and simply look at it as a mathematical equation without any electrical underpinnings. So in this model, there is the simple parallel circuit of a resistor and a capacitor, and something like a model of a single channel, right? And you're injecting current from outside. So the voltage equation at that node where the current is injected is given by the equation below. C dV by dt plus V by R is equal to external current. That is, total input current is equal to total external current, total output outgoing current. So this is a simple Kirchhoff's current law. Now, if this is the only thing, then the capacitor will keep on charging, and then the voltage will keep on increasing. So that's not very interesting. That's not going to produce spikes. So to produce spikes, we're going to introduce some auxiliary dynamics, where you say that whenever the capacitor voltage exceeds some threshold, we reset it. Right? I mean, so this is the kind of thing you see even in slightly more complicated neuron models, right? Like for example, if we take the Fujinaga model, if you take the Fujinaga model with this kind of null lines, whenever the voltage right crosses some threshold, sorry, this is W, this is voltage. Whenever it crosses the threshold A, right, it goes up and then comes down, right, so it gets reset. So that is given in a much simpler form here. Whenever the voltage is equal to some threshold theta, right, then voltage reset to 0. So this is an auxiliary dynamic which you have to add to this simple linear equation 11. So if you do that, what happens? So what happens is because of when you give it, let's say DC current given by I naught into ut. So ut is a step function. You give a constant current. Then the solution to this equation is given by this. Vt is equal to R I naught times 1 minus e power minus t by tau, where tau is equal to right RC. So if you do that, then you simply without this resetting step, you simply have the voltage getting charged up like this, increasing monotonically and tending to some limit. So that is given by this equation. So this you can substitute this back into this equation and verify that it satisfies this equation. So now how does the resetting work? So if the Vt is equal to theta, right? So something like this, theta, then you have to reset it back to 0. So basically, so where is the spike in this? Because this is a very slow wave. It doesn't look anything like a spike. So the idea is in this model, we just imagine that spike occurs whenever this resetting is done. Because so basically, even in a neuron, right? In a more complicated neuron model, you see like a slow increase, and then only when the voltage crosses threshold, you see a spike riding over that flat stretch. So similarly here also, you imagine that spike occurs exactly at that time. Okay. So you ignore all this slow rise and all that. So VT itself doesn't denote the spike. It simply denotes the subthreshold activity of the membrane voltage. Spike is thought to occur exactly at that time when the voltage reaches a threshold and is reset. So in this case, the spike itself is like a delta function. It doesn't occupy any duration, doesn't have any duration, right? And so spikes are thought to occur whenever this resetting takes place. So if your input current is not a DC current, then the spike to spike intervals are not going to be homogeneous, not going to be uniform, because as the current varies, the time at which it spikes, it crosses threshold also varies, right? So the spikes are not going to be uniform. But in this simple case, we are considering constant current. So the waveform, VT waveform, will reach the threshold periodically, right? And therefore you have a periodic spike train emerging out of the neuron model. So now, how do you calculate the frequency of spiking? Because that's a very important property, right? How do you get the frequency of spiking as a function of the input current? So for that, we need to first see if I0 is the input current, at what value, right, or at what time does the voltage reach the threshold of theta? So let us say that time is some time t. Okay, so it's shown here more clearly. So if it reaches the threshold at some time t, what is that time? So in this equation 12, we just substitute that small t equal to capital T, that time it reaches, and then on the left side you have theta. So if you solve for this and write this expression in terms of t, capital T, then you get t is equal to tau ln Ri0 by Ri0 minus theta. So note that this whole fraction Ri0 by Ri0 minus theta is inside the ln or logarithmic function. So log can only work with with positive quantities. Log of a negative quantity will become a complex number, right? So therefore, so which means that for the argument to be positive, right, Ri0 minus theta should be positive, so Ri0 must be greater than theta. So only then you'll have a t. So Ri0 is greater than theta, which means I0 is greater than theta by r. So only when I0 is greater than theta by r, right, you will cross this threshold, and then there'll be some kind of a firing, right? So for very smaller currents, there is no firing, and so since frequency is 1 over t, you get f. So f is equal to 1 over t, right? You get this whole thing. Okay, so this threshold, well, the idea that there is a threshold comes through in this formula, right? So because you have firing only after some I0 crosses some threshold value. After that, it kind of increases monotonically. So it's a simplistic neuron model, because if you look at the Fujimoto, I'm not saying Fujimoto is standard, but it's a slightly more, or Hodgkin model. It's since it's a more biologically realistic model. You don't have any firing up to some threshold value of the current, right? And then after that, suddenly it starts firing at certain finite frequency, and it increases but saturates. And beyond the point, there is again no firing, and kind of after that, there's no curve. The curve stops there because of very high current. There's no oscillations at all. Okay, so whereas here it keeps on increasing monotonically. So it will be nicer to get a curve which looks something like this. Saturates right beyond a point. So in order to get that, people have thrown a little bit of a small hack here, because what happens is in case of a real neuron, once the neuron spikes, it will fail to get excited again for some time, for some duration. So let us say this neuron spikes at this time. After that, for some duration, call this some t rev, right? There cannot be any spiking. Okay, so So the integration happens only after the duration. So no response for some time. And the real neurons do exhibit that behavior. That duration is called the refractory period, right? So just to incorporate that in the model, so we add a constant called Tref, right? So that means when you give a current I naught, right, it reaches threshold at this time, capital T, and after that it remains silent for a period of Tref, and then again only after that it starts charging up again. So this is the new modified integrated fired neuron model. If you do that, then your T now becomes this quantity like before plus some constant Tref. Then frequency becomes 1 over this. Okay, so because of this, right, how much ever increase I naught, right, the F will not increase monotonically, because so here what happens is, as increase I naught monotonically, the ratio here inside the ln tends to 1. So ln 1 is 0, therefore 1 over 0 goes to infinity. So it goes to infinity. Whereas here in the denominator you have ln of this whole this ratio plus a constant, a small positive constant. So therefore, even when this long term becomes 0, you still have this positive constant left. There 1 over that will be a finite number. So with this introduction of the refractory period, this neuron model doesn't blow up, and frequency doesn't blow up, right? And it doesn't increase indefinitely, and it tends to it shows saturating effect. It tends to a limit. It approaches a limit as I naught tends to infinity. Okay, so now we get to this question of neural code. We'll come back to this discussion a little bit later again in this class. So basically, we have seen two different kinds of neuron models. So until now, we have seen the spiking neuron models, right, where the spike itself is very important, right? Especially the time of the spike. So now the question is, what exactly is the information present in the neural signal? So this is a long-standing debate, and currently there are two dominant theories. One is called the rate code, other is called the spike code. So, for example, in this last neuron model, although it produces spikes, right, the information we are interested in regarding the neuron's activity is the frequency of that spikes or the rate of the spiking, right? So if you say that the only information that is important in a neuron's activity is the frequency of the spikes, right, then you are referring to the rate code. Whereas if you say that the information is also present, right, in an even more detailed fashion, embedded in the spike to spike intervals, right, because spike itself has standard shape and size, the spike itself doesn't have much information. The only information left is in this duration between one spike and the next spike. So if you are referring to that information, then you are talking about the spike code. So these are the two ways, two standard prominent ways in which you look at information present in neurons activity. Therefore, people talk about the spike code and rate code. So until now, we have only looked at, we have started with a very detailed model which produces spikes, the Hodgkin-Huxley model. And in the Hodgkin-Huxley model, again, the spikes are more or less constant. Only thing is, as you increase current, the spikes also get distorted and become more smooth, because the classic feature of a spike is that it should be have a very sharp pointed end, and that's why it's called a spike. But in Hodgkin-Huxley, as the current is increased, it's no more spiky, it becomes smooth sinusoid. In case of Fujinaga, the spike doesn't look so pointed, it looks right something like that, right? Its spike itself has some slightly smoother signal in case of Hodgkin-Huxley and even Morris-Lacquer, right? But strictly a spike code refers to only the spike to spike duration. Therefore, the spike waveform itself is taken to be like a delta function. I don't care much about the details of the waveform. I'm only interested in. Okay, so thing is, these two are idealizations. This is refer to certain kind of emphasis, right? Certain perspective that we take, an outlook that we take to in reading the neural activity, the neural signal. So we have seen Torsional tree model, then we have seen simplified simple neuron models, two variable ones, Fujinogumo, Morris-Lekar, and so on, that which gives smooth oscillations. Then we have seen Izukevich neuron models, right? And Izukevich neuron models, they produce some kind of a spike, right? But the drop is by a hard reset. Okay, so this part has no particular shape. The reset part is instantaneous, there's no shape. There's some shape on the left side of the spike as the voltage approaches to that peak value. Okay, so this is, you can say it's a, so in the Fujinogumo there is a full spike, right? On both sides there is some rise and fall and everything. Whereas in case of Izukevich, it's a hard reset, so this side is no, it is closer to a spike. An ideal spike is just a delta function. So now a leaky integrated fire neuron model, there is a voltage waveform which is increasing and reset, getting reset, increasing, gets reset. And whenever it gets reset, you assume there is a spike. So here the spikes are ideal. I mean, spikes are not explicitly present in the dynamics. You just kind of reconstruct them, right, notionally at every resetting event. So that is a leak integrated fire. Okay, so so we've seen some spike neuron model. Now let us see some red-coded neuron model. So red-coded neuron model is a different way of describing the neuron's information. Suppose you have a spike code, right, bunch of spikes which look like this, right? The corresponding red code. So in the beginning, in this stretch, the spikes are of low frequency. Suddenly the spike frequency increases. After that, there are no spikes; it becomes silent. So if you want to express the same thing in a red code, you will have a flat stretch initially of a low value, then another flat stretch of a higher value, and then come back to zero. So this is the red code, right? So this is for this spike. This is the red code. So let us construct some simple neuron models which exhibit the red code. The simplest kind of neuron model is simply a binary neuron model, which is dynamic. So we'll introduce this neuron model and discuss it later in detail when we describe the Hopfield neuron model, but let us quickly define it now. So for this neuron model, the dynamics is given like this. So imagine this is a neuron, the current is given as input and output is a voltage V. So this is kind of we have been seeing in many neuron models, right? There is, whether it is Fujinogumo or Morris-Lekar or Izukevich, there's a neuron model, input is the current, output is the voltage, and there's some dynamics going on inside the neuron model. This is a kind of a format for a lot of neuron models we have been seeing in the last few classes. Here also it is similar, but the only thing is the internal dynamics is very simple. There's only a single dynamical variable U, which links the external current I with the voltage V. And how is that? How does it happen? So this U is given by the dynamics tau into U dot. So it is tau into U dot is equal to minus U plus V plus IT. IT is the external current, where V is given as a tan H of lambda of U, a tan function. Lambda is slope of the tan H function. So basically, if I ignore the tau for a second, U dot is equal to minus U plus tan H of lambda U plus I. Okay, so I can take this as U. So let us see what happens when U dot is 0. Right, so when U dot is 0, you have U equal to tan H of lambda U plus I. So let us, to find out the solutions of this, right, graphically, let us take this as two equations, y equal to U and y equal to tan H lambda U plus I. Let's take the two equations. Now we want to understand the intersection points of these two graphs. Okay, so that's just same thing. No, I'm not solving this directly. Right, I'm imagining that there are two graphs, y equal to U and y equal to tan H lambda U plus I. I'm looking at the intersection points of these two graphs. So that's what I'm doing in this picture. So this is the graph of y equal to U. This is the graph of y equal to tan H of lambda U plus some I naught. So this particular picture is showing I naught equal to 0. Right, that's why the tanh is going through the origin here. So otherwise, if you I naught is the positive, tanh curve will be lifted up. If I naught is negative, it will be lifted down. And you see that in this condition, the two graphs intersect at 3 points, right? This must be reminding you of the Fujimoto model with in the last case, where by a certain choice of the parameters you are able to get 3 intersection points, and among them the points on the flanks are stable, and the point the middle point was a saddle node, right? Here also you have something similar. This is not a saddle because it's a one variable system, but here what happens is you can easily make out that this point and this point are stable and this point is unstable. So how do we see that? So again, if you look at this, so thing is here again, if lambda is close to 0, sorry, if I is close to 0, you get 3 intersection points, which will, therefore the graph will look like this. Okay, so you have to subtract, so to get the original dynamics, right, you have to it is u dot is equal to minus u plus nh of lambda u plus I. So which means the straight line must be subtracted from the sigmoidal curve. All right. So if that is the case, we need to see which is higher. So you see that in this stretch. So I'll take these 3 points. See that in this stretch, I'll call this let's say u plus, and this I'll call u minus. So in this stretch, the sigmoid is above the straight line, so which means the u dot is positive. So if I start from here, I go towards this point. So similarly, in this stretch, the straight line is higher above the sigmoidal curve. So if I start from here, I decrease. So u dot is negative, right? And therefore, similarly, you can see here, if I go beyond this point, the sign changes, so it comes like this. If I go beyond this point, the sign again changes, so it comes like this. You can easily see that these 2 points are stable and origin is unstable. It is a bistable system. But what happens when you increase the current? When you increase the current, take it, give it a positive value, then at some point the 3 intersection points disappear. You are left with only one intersection point, and that will be at some positive value of the voltage, right? And that value will be stable. Similarly, if you give a negative current, a constant negative current, and if you give a sufficiently strong input negative current, then there will be only one intersection point which will be at some negative value, and that will be stable. Oops. Okay, so this is what happens if you increase and decrease current. This is a kind of dynamics you get. Now, one more property of this is you need to worry about the value of lambda. So all this, 3 intersection points and all that, you will get only when lambda is greater than 1, right? Because when lambda is greater than 1, the slope of lambda refers to the slope of the sigmoid function, the tanh function. And the slope of the straight line is 1 because straight line refers to y equal to u. So slope is 1. Whereas the tanh nonlinearity, the slope at origin is lambda. Only when lambda is greater than 0, you have this kind of intersection. If lambda is less than, lambda is greater than 1. If lambda is less than 1, you have something like this, right? So the sigmoid and the straight line don't intersect at 3 points. They only intersect at 1 point, the origin. So nothing interesting happens. Okay, so now one more interesting property of this is, so we said that when I is a sufficiently high positive value, you get a single stable point. When I is sufficiently large negative value, you get a single negative stable point. But when I is in some intermediate range, right, you'll have 3 intersection points and therefore 2 stable points. So depending upon the initial condition, you might go to u plus or u minus. Right. So because of this bistability property, so you know that a lot of bistable systems exhibit hysteresis. So that is, if I if I take a large, so if I increase the current from some negative value to positive values, right? So at some point you can imagine that the output goes to positive value, right? And the transitions to positive value. And if I go to sufficiently high positive current and then come back, right, at some point the voltage transitions to the negative value. This transitioning happens, where it exhibits a hysteresis. So when I go to a high positive current and come back, the transition to the negative current happens somewhere here. So to negative states happens somewhere here. So then I go further and decrease the current. Now when I come back and increase the current, the transition to the positive value doesn't happen here. It happens a bit later. So the path it takes between the transitions, right, when the current goes from positive to negative, is different from the path it takes, right, for make the transition when the current goes from negative to positive. So this is the hysteresis. So this is an interesting property of a dynamic binary neuron. So now, until now, we've been seeing neuron models, right, where you just have a neuron model and input is some current I, output is some voltage V. Okay, but if you want to have a slightly more interesting, serious neuron model, we need to expand this current into its sources. So this current, where is it coming from? So if you suppose you are doing an experiment, like the way Hodgson and Huxley have done, then you take an axon and poke current and then you show the response. I mean, you are done. That's what you're interested in. But if you really want to understand how a neuron works and how a network of neurons work, we need to explain how neurons talk to each other. Right? We need to add the synapse also into the picture. Then it becomes slightly more interesting. So this is a very simple model, right, which is a static model. Because until now, the neural models which we have shown, they're all dynamic models. They're described by differential equations. So for the first time, I'm introducing a very simple neuron model which is static, right? And where you also, since it's such a simple model, I can afford to talk about external inputs coming from other neurons, because the neuron model itself is very simple. So how do you do that? So here, imagine there is a neuron, and it gets inputs from many other neurons. So here the output of I'm not modeling spikes anymore. This is a rate-coded neuron, and it's a binary neuron. So I imagine that the states can be just 1 or 0. So here, in case of this dynamic binary neuron, the state can be +1 or -1. Whereas here, there are two kinds of conventions, right? One convention is plus or minus 1 convention, which is what we have just seen. Another convention is 1-0 convention. So when we say binary, it is enough it has two states. The two states conventionally can be either 0-1 or 1-1. So if it is, and this difference is captured by the kind of nonlinear function that we use here. So this neuron model is given like this. I have a neuron. It gets inputs from many other neurons. The activities of other neurons is given as x1, x2, xi, xn, and so on. And remember, we talked about the idea of strength of a synapse, right? Synapse is something that converts an input spike into a PSP, either ePSP or an iPSP. And we know that you can have a weak ePSP or a strong ePSP and so on. So we have talked about the notion of a strength of a synapse. So here we are using that notion, and we represent it by a number, by a continuous parameter W. Right. So the neuron's activity is x1. The corresponding weight of the synapse is W1, and so on. So here it's xi and wi and so on. Right. So all these neurons sends their inputs or send their outputs as inputs to this neuron, where this neuron adds up all these contributions as a weighted sum given by sigma wi xi. Now we know that if this weighted sum crosses a threshold, let's call it theta, the output this neuron fires becomes activated. So if y is equal to 1. If the weighted sum doesn't cross the threshold of theta, it doesn't fire. So this can be captured by this neuron model y equal to f of sigma I wi xi minus theta. So you see that if the argument is positive, output is 1, argument is negative, output is 0. So basically f is a step function. Right. So this neuron model is called the McCullough and Pitts neuron model. This is pretty much one of the simplest or the simplest neuron model possible. Right. And the entire field of artificial neural networks has is begun with this neuron model. This was proposed by McCullough and Pitts way back in the 40s, 1940s. Right. And after that, the neural networks slowly got developed in the 60s after a gap of 20 years for various reasons. So if the nonlinear function is a step function, then the neuron states will be either 1 or 0. If the nonlinear function is a signum function, right, SGN, then which is given by this. If the argument is positive, it is 1. Argument is negative, it is minus 1. At 0 argument, it has a discontinuity. Okay, so it's undefined. So this signum function. If you use this, then your neuron state can be plus or minus 1. You also have smoother versions of this kind of function. Like for example, there is what's called, we call this a smooth sigmoid nonlinearity. So also here also this kind of function can go from 0 to 1 or minus 1 to 1. If you want a function that goes from 0 to 1, you use something called the logistic function, which is given by y equal to 1 by 1 plus e power minus lambda x. Lambda is positive, typically greater than 1. Then the function looks like this. For x equal to minus infinity, right, you can see that this goes up and whole function is 0, goes to 0. X equal to plus infinity, this term becomes 0, therefore y goes to 1. At x equal to 0, it goes to half. Okay, so that is the logistic function. Now, if you want to use 1 minus 1 convention, and if you want to have a continuous function that varies from minus 1 to 1, then you go for the tanh function. Okay, so to summarize, we have seen different kind of neuron models. Now I'll group them slightly differently because I want to motivate a discussion on what is a good neuron model, what is an ideal neuron model. Okay, I'll come back to the discussion in a minute. So to motivate the discussion, I'll divide the neuron models in 3 categories. Until now, just a moment ago, I talked about only 2 categories: the red code and the spike code, or therefore red coded neuron models and spike coded neuron models. But now I want to motivate and introduce a new kind of neuron model. Therefore, to that end, I'll just regroup the neuron models that we have discussed so far slightly differently. I'll call the Fujinagumo and Maurice Descartes and NAPK. I didn't discuss NAPK, but it's very similar. I'll call them the oscillator neuron models, because in these models, I have explicitly limit cycle oscillations. In the spike neuron models, there are no limit cycles. What you have there are not limit cycles. You just have a resetting step, right? Whereas only in these 3 models, among those we discussed, we have limit cycles. The limit cycles are oscillations. So I'll distinguish them slightly. So these models also model the spike, right? There is a waveform and all that. And the spike also doesn't have, once it stabilizes in the limit cycle, it has standard shape and size. But otherwise, suppose this is the limit cycle and start from outside and come back in. Right, during the transient, the spike will be bigger and then comes back and then stabilize. Right, so the spikes are not like absolutely, they don't have absolutely the same size during the transient. Once it stabilizes, it has a standard shape and size. Okay, anyway, so dynamically it is slightly different. It's not the same as spike. So I'll group these 3 models slightly differently. I'll call them oscillator neuron models. Then we have the proper spike neuron models. Here we had the Izhikevich 2-variable model, which we said is very powerful. It shows universal behaviors. It shows wide variety of behaviors executed by real neurons. Then we looked at, this has 2 variables. Then we knocked off 1 variable and left with only 1 variable, the voltage variable. And we got the quadratic integrated fire neuron model. After that, we reduce the quadratic to linear linear function, and we got the leak integrated fire neuron model. So all three are spiking neuron models. Then we talked about the rate-coded neuron models, dynamic binary neuron, which has bistability and which shows hysteresis. Then the sigmoid, sigmoidal neurons, which are static, there's no dynamics. Right, so among rate-coded neurons also we can have dynamic neurons and static neurons. And finally, the McCullough-Pitts neuron model, which also, so you can have a static neuron which just takes input current I and converts it to output V, okay, by passing it through some kind of a step function. But a McCullough-Pitts neuron model is more interesting because it also includes external inputs and the synaptic connections and the strengths. So it's slightly more interesting, and more you can use it for more things. Okay, so that's a summary of, right, I have looked at lots of different simplified neuron models. So with this background, I'll quickly motivate kind of a new neuron model, and we'll discuss it in greater detail tomorrow. But I'll just introduce it in today's class. So this is from a talk that I prepared, to give talks about it outside. So the title of this is Computing with Rhythms. Right? How do you compute with oscillations? So therefore, you need some kind of an oscillatory network to compute with oscillations. Right. So we propose a whole new class of networks called oscillatory deep neural networks, or the search for it. What kind of how do you construct networks of oscillators? So this is and a lot of it is the work of my PhD student Deepa Biswas. So, so we have seen that brain is a network of neurons and all that, and when you record from a single neuron using a microelectrode, which actually penetrates the cell body, or even an axon if it is thick enough, you see these spikes, right? So if you ask the question, what is neural code? We have seen that there are two different kinds of schools of thought. One is the spike code, other is the rate code. Right, and like I said just now, the spike code tries to emphasize only the time of spiking. The spike waveform itself is ignored. You don't bother about it. And therefore, ideally, you represent the neural signal using this train of delta functions. The information is all in these values TIs. Whereas the rate code refers to the frequency of spike. That is, so if you have a spike train like this, the corresponding spike code will just have delta functions at each of these occurrences of spike. Because real signal is slightly more complicated because it has some waveform, underlying waveform. Spike code only looks at the spike event times, whereas rate code looks at only the frequency. So in this case, the neuron is silent for some time, suddenly it starts spiking at high frequency and slows down. After some time, it stops firing. So basically, like in the rate code, I can describe this as a sharp discontinuous rise and a gradual decrease after a sudden fall back to zero. So therefore, since there are two concepts of neural code, you can have neural networks which embody those concepts, or you can have neuron models which embody those concepts. You can have spiking neuron models, or you can have rate-coded neuron models. Usually, I mean, things are not so cut and dry, but usually if you are looking at slightly interesting brain models, you use those spike neuron networks. Whereas if you want to develop more artificial models, I mean, deep neural networks, used in say AI and deep learning kind of domain, you use rate-coded neuron models. Usually in deep learning literature, you don't use spike neuron networks. So among rate-coded neurons, we have looked at the sigmoidal neuron and small variations of that. In deep learning literature, we also use something called the ReLU neuron, so where it is given by this function, right? Y is equal to x for x positive, otherwise 0. Okay, and then there's also something called LSTM, a long short-term memory block, which is actually a very complicated, a lot of internal dynamics that goes on inside this, right? So there are information input coming in, information going out, information inside also latched by different gates. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about this in this course. I just want to say that there are different variations of different kinds of rate-coded neuron models. So now if you look at the history of deep learning, right, they started off by as neural networks, what were called neural networks, which began in the 80s and 90s. Then say neural network, especially feed-forward neural network, have an input layer and a hidden layer and output layer. All right. In fact, the original MLPs, multi-layer perceptrons, in the earlier studies of the 1980s, they used to look at the networks with only single hidden layer. But the backpropagation algorithm, which was derived for MLPs, will work for a network of any number of hidden layers. Right. So deep networks were not invented in 2006. They were there all along. It is just that due to computing limitations of computing resources, people were not simulating large networks on a routine basis. And also, it's difficult to make large networks work unless you have good computing resources. And also, the theories of what are called, universal approximation theorems, which say that a neural network can learn any function and all that. I'll discuss all that later on in the course. They were all designed or developed for a network with a single hidden layer. So for this reason also people are mostly focusing on networks with single hidden layer. But whereas the original theory itself included, even the definition of multi-layer perceptron doesn't say it has to be single layer. But in 2006, Hinton and others, they have presented that, presented some results that say that networks with many number of hidden layers are very powerful, can do a lot of things. Actually, even such networks existed even before in 1988, around 1988. LeCun and others proposed this large network which has many hidden layers, the convolution neural network, but they didn't call them a deep network. Somehow this terminology stuck when Hinton and all talked about deep learning in 2006 paper. So anyway, this is I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but I just want to talk about the history of this a little bit. So a deep neural network is something where you have lots of hidden layers, and spiking neuron models or networks. We have seen some of these models, right, where they produce spikes. And we also seen that Izhikevich neuron can produce a wide variety of neural dynamics, continuously modeled by physical models. So you see that if you look at the different kinds of neuron models that we have seen, we have been trying to put them into strict categories, but actually they form something like a continuum. Right, at one end of the continuum, we have seriously bio-inspired neuron models, right, where you can even model the entire dendritic tree and soma and axon propagation, all that stuff. That is the one extreme. So you can call them detailed spike neuron models. And there are a lot more than that, because their objective is not to produce spikes, but to describe the dynamics of a neuron in its entirety. That is one end. The other end is a red-coded neuron model where you just have a sigmoidal neuron, totally static, no dynamics at all. That's the other end. So this is too artificial, this is too real, not too biological. Now, one big question that keeps recurring is what is a good middle ground? Because at one end it is very realistic, but it's not practical to construct network models with biophysical models, right? And whereas you can make a lot of practical applications and construct large networks and all that with a sigmoidal neuron or a ReLU neuron, which is what we do in deep learning. But then the complaint is, oh, it is not biologically realistic. So where do we draw the line? What is that golden mean where you have an excellent neuron model? So the question of right level comes up in neuroscience and computational neuroscience very often, and people, of course, this is a very deep problem, but there's no clear resolution of this problem, right? And whereas successful methods very often have answered this question very nicely, effectively, and therefore they're able to do wonderful things. And this is something that happens all the time in engineering. Right? Take, for example, the problem of designing an aircraft wing. Right? You want to understand the pressures of the airflow on the wing and things like that. So you can normally you just model it using fluid flow dynamics, fluid flow equations like Navier-Stokes equations. But remember that fluid is not it's an abstraction. It's not molecules. because in the description there are no molecules. When you write Navier-Stokes equation, there are no molecules mentioned. We are not talking about billiard ball type collisions among molecules. We're talking about this strange thing, which is a continuum called fluid, and what kind of laws it obeys. Right? When you write the fluid flow dynamics of the air flow, right, you get a very powerful application. But if you try to go all the way to the molecular level, it becomes a mess. Your design process will take forever and ever. So just as in case of fluid mechanics, we were able to come with the right abstraction, not too detailed, not too abstract and coarse, something in between, and that gives us great applications. So similarly, in this case also, what does that golden mean between the very detailed biophysical models on one side and an abstract Markelov and Pitts kind of a static neuron model on the other? Okay, so what I will try to argue in the next class is that golden mean is the oscillator models, not spike neuron models, not static models like Markelov and Pitts, but oscillator models which are based on limit cycle kind of dynamics, right? Because these kind of neuron models don't represent single neurons, because both rate-coded neuron models and spike neuron models, they're meant to describe the dynamics of a single neuron, right? Whereas there is another school of thought which says perhaps single neurons are not the ideal functional building block of brain dynamics, right? For that, we need to look at not a single neuron, but a pool of neurons, what's called a neural ensemble. Okay, so neural ensemble is a more fundamental building block. That is one school of thought. So if you take this, right, then the model of a neural ensemble, the average activity of a neural ensemble, cannot be spikes, but it is better described by an oscillator, right, and not by a spiking unit. So that motivates us to discuss a whole class of models, or neural oscillator models. So in my lab, we've been trying to build this theory, and kind of the ultimate goal is to rework the entire neural network theory in terms of oscillators. It can be very exciting. So let me stop with this introduction now, and tomorrow I'm going to introduce these oscillator models and show how to construct networks of such oscillators.